Morning, folks. I'm David Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School, back in another in our series, Gear of the 20th Century Woodsman. And this piece of gear is a very relevant piece of kit that I want to talk to you today about, and it's got great historical value as well. And this is the Coleman 530 pocket stove. Stay with me.
Hey, I'm living good back in the woods.
In World War II, the government approached W.C. Coleman and asked him to make a stove that could be used by soldiers. And there were some stipulations put on how that stove was to be made. It had to be small enough that it wasn't bigger than a thermos, like a 2-quart thermos. Something preferably that could be stashed away or packed away fairly easily. It had to be able to operate in temperatures from minus 60 degrees to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And it also had to be able to use multiple fuels. And it took Coleman 60 days to come up with the prototype for the Coleman stove that was used during World War II, the pocket stove, which was the 20 series of this stove. This is the civilian version, the 30 series. The only difference between the 20 and 30 series really were, other than manufacturing dates, the military version had an OD green tank and it had some feet on it so that it would be more stable standing up. And that stove was taken to Africa first during World War II, and it was used throughout World War II by troops in trenches, in foxholes, and throughout their theater of operations. And it was known to many, many individuals of high rank during that time to be one of the most reliable pieces of kit the soldier had next to the Jeep. So I think that speaks very well to the quality and the reliability of the stove. Again, it could burn unleaded fuel, so they could use the fuel from their Jeeps in the stove. And after the war was over, Coleman knew that they had a success. So they decided to make the 30 series stove in a civilian version, which was a plated copper tank, or brass tank, I believe, that's got silver plating on it. And it was used at that point and advertised for the outdoorsman, for the fisherman, for the hiker, for the camper, for the hunter. And there are advertisements that I'll put on this video of this stove being put into the pocket of a hunting jacket. This stove is 4.5 inches in diameter when it's closed, and it is 8.5 inches tall. But it weighs about 3 pounds, so it does have some weight to it. By today's standards, it's outrageously heavy. But for nostalgia's sake, it's an awesome stove. And some of the cool features of the stove were that the grate folded into itself on pivot points. The funnel sat inside the stove housing here, and it sat inside of a container like this with the wrench, which was for all of the fixtures on the outside of the stove, and also doubled as a handle for both pots so that you could use these pots for cooking in as well, just like this. So you had a larger pot and a smaller pot. Now, obviously these things would have smelled a lot like kerosene or gasoline or whatever you were burning in them at the time. But Coleman suggested that you could just turn this pot upside down and burn those fuels out, boil some water in it, dump it out, and you'd be ready to cook in it at that point. But everything went into this single, or these double containers that became a single container and locked together just like this, so that you had a one-piece cook set that could be carried anywhere that you wanted to pack it, whether it was your backpack if you were a soldier, or in the coat pocket or backpack of a hunter or a fisherman. It's a very innovative system. It is very similar to many of the systems that came to market, like the Sphia 123, like the Primus stoves and things like that we'll talk about in future videos. But because of its historic value as far as being something that was used by soldiers during the war and then transferred to the civilian market, I thought we should talk about this stove first. So these stoves are slightly fussy, and you really kind of need to preheat them to get them to not blow a giant flame on you as soon as you light them up. Like any Coleman stove, they have a tank that you fill up about 2/3 of the way, and it was said that this would burn for 4 solid hours on the lowest setting on that 1 pint of fuel, and then it would boil 2 cups of water in less than 5 minutes. And that's been tested several times on the internet and does hold true. The stove puts out 5,300 BTUs when it's burning at full capacity, which made it very useful for soldiers as well as a personal heating device, as long as there was plenty of ventilation. So you would pump this stove, and this one's pumped up already because I just had it fired up not very long ago. And you would turn the handle clockwise to lock it off. You would crack the fuel valve just enough to allow fuel to escape. And you can hear it when you do that. Now, if you don't want this thing to go up in a big ball of fire, I would suggest you do just like you do with those older stoves and maybe prime the pan just a little bit with some alcohol or something like that. Light that first, and then turn the stove on. At that point, you can open about a quarter of a turn. It's going to spit this heavy yellow flame until that bowl gets completely warmed up and it starts drawing fuel. You can then open the valve a little at a time. It does tend to blow itself out a little bit. We'll put a little more priming alcohol in there. Make sure we're pumped up. Try her again. Again, big ball of flames to start off with. But it will turn into a nice blue flame here in a minute once everything gets heated up and it starts to draw. And then you can open the fuel valve all the way if you choose to do that. If you do that too quick, it'll blow it out like it did on me. You'll have to reprime everything. Just kind of adjust it until you get it where you need it, until it starts burning solid blue. There it goes. Now she's rocking and rolling. And then you're ready to cook your meal. All right, guys, I appreciate you joining me today for this video on the Coleman 530 pocket stove. I'm not a Coleman expert by any means. There's lots and lots of videos about this stove and other stoves on the internet. If you're interested in buying one or repairing one, I suggest you go look at those videos. And there's also lots of sites online where you can buy parts for these old stoves as well. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I appreciate everything you do for our school, for our family, for our business, for all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit your notification bell, and I'll be back to another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.